Well, you've seen what the ministers had to say. Clyde Mallinson is an independent energy expert. He joins us now. Clyde, good afternoon to you. Kgosientso Ramakgopa is clearly a natural-born optimist. Otherwise, I don't think he would have taken this job on. Is there any cause for optimism that the lower levels of load shedding we should have for the rest of the week will actually stay? Or could we have really intense load shedding again soon?
You know, I don't like to make forecasts on this. What I did is, in January of this year, I produced a forecast table, having just said I don't like to make forecasts. And on that table, I forecast what the maximum load shedding would be each month based on the performance of the coal fleet. So it was predicated on, if the coal fleet performs poorly, we'll have higher levels of load shedding. If it performs well, we'll have lower levels. So I kind of hedged my bets, if you like. And the table has proved to be almost exactly correct. If I go through what's happened this year and I look at the worst performance of the coal fleet in any 1 month and look at what I said the load shedding maximum would be, then they tally almost exactly. So that's what it boils down to. So you've heard some people talking about the so-called perfect storm. So the perfect storm was when we went to stage 6 suddenly over the weekend or Friday last week. It wasn't a perfect storm. It was just a normal cold front that we get every winter. And the coal fleet, which performs sort of up and down, if it happens to hit a down spot at the time when we hit a cold snap, well, then you get a higher level of load shedding. But fortunately, it's relatively short-lived because it's just in that peak evening period. And you will have noted, viewers will have noted, that we seem to have returned to a period where we have higher levels of load shedding from about 4 o'clock to midnight, and then it eases off, which means we've sort of got enough energy in the system, but we're short of capacity at peak times, and we've reverted to that, which is much, much better than having 24/7 load shedding at stage 3 or 4, for example, where we're just short of energy, never mind capacity. So, yeah, I'm pleased with the way the coal fleet has performed so far this winter. But I wish they would make forecasts the same as the weather people do. There's a 50% probability that there will be stage 6 load shedding in the next 3 weeks, rather than, gee, we're out of the worst and everything's going to be hunky-dory. There needs to be a probabilistic approach to these statements.
Another expert sitting in that chair several months ago suggested that the 3rd week of July, so this week,
yes,
and the 1st week of August,
yes,
would probably be the worst weeks. I don't know if that was based on a long-range weather forecast, or if it just is what it is, maybe the duration of winter. How do you read that?
Yeah, look, you typically have, well, not typically, but I seem to recall having some of our coldest snaps towards the end of July and early August. I was in New York, I think, once in February, which is quite past the middle of winter, and it was minus 32, I think. It was naught. It was naught Fahrenheit, which I think is minus 17. And so it seems that the back end of winter, you often have colder snaps. And of course, then if the load goes up, and we have a period where the coal fleet has a bit of a wobble, yes, we may well see our first incidents of stage 7.
I've been told that coal-fired power stations actually produce a little bit more power in winter, yes, because of the temperature differential. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. Think of a coal plant. The water that goes through the turbines has to cool down. It's a bit like the radiator in your car. And the simple question is, if you had a dodgy radiator and you were driving through the Karoo, would you prefer to be doing that on a hot summer's day or a cold winter's day? And it's kind of the same analogy. You can manage a bit better if you're having to cool water down and it's already cool. It's just that much easier. And some of the coal plants don't have water cooling; they have air cooling. And think of that old Volkswagen camper going through the heat of the day versus a cold day. Your oil temperature is gonna go up, and you're gonna have to ease off. So what happens when the cooling isn't working efficiently. And there's a whole lot of systems that rely on water, heat exchangers and all sorts of things. If they're not operating efficiently, you run your plant, but you can't run it at its optimum level. You have to sort of run at, I don't know, 70% of what it's capable of to allow the cooling systems to catch up, as it were.
The situation at Coburg, that refurbishment appears to be running late. I mean, wasn't this always going to happen? A nuclear power refurbishment is not something you really want to rush?
Man, you know, I'm on record of having recommended that they don't refurbish Coburg and that they keep it running. And I said we're going to need it in the next 2 years because I predict that the coal fleet's not going to be doing that well. And if you looked at Coburg in the same way you look at tail-ender batsmen and said we would prefer Coburg to bat for us and then retire gracefully. And we didn't do that, and unfortunately, it seems I was correct. Coburg, one unit of Coburg has been down for 18 months now. And it's not an estimate this, it's a reality that for 18 months we've had an additional stage of load shedding that we wouldn't have had Coburg not being refurbished. And at the very conservative level of 10 Rand a kilowatt hour for cost of unserved electricity, City of Cape Town use 100 Rand a kilowatt hour, just to put it in perspective. At 10 Rand a kilowatt hour, the fact that we haven't had Coburg available for 18 months, the full Coburg, has cost our economy 120 billion Rand,
sure,
on top of whatever the refurbishment is going to cost. And it's not conjecture at this stage. That's happened. You can see that we've had load shedding wall to wall for the last 18 months, basically.
Sure. So if we lose, because they have to start the second unit to be refurbished as well, and I presume there are all sorts of complicated timetables. I imagine that French companies are involved in this. You need to book them, and you know they're very few of them.
Yes.
You could end up with, excuse me, you could end up with basically both units out.
Yeah, that's very problematic. When I say it's very problematic, I've had running arguments with many energy experts who far more expert than I'm not an energy expert, I'm an analyst. And the experts tell me you can't run our grid without Coburg. You need it as a kind of a balancing inertia provider. It's always on. So my question then is, well, if it's not on even for a couple of days, how did the grid run while it wasn't on? It's kind of an instantaneous thing, the grid. It's not, oh, well, we sort of... So I'm interested to see, and I would almost want there to be a bit of 2 units down, just to show, well, we can actually run the grid without Coburg. What about, so that's one angle. The other angle is, I don't have that much confidence left anymore in the ability of Eskom to execute a project like that. And I say that quite sadly, really. Imagine you starting in January last year, and you've got the whole team out from France with their croissant oven and whatever they bring with them. And then someone says, where are we going to put the nuclear, the sort of radiating generators, where are we going to put them? And someone says, weren't we meant to build a containment building? And someone says, oh, hell, we forgot to build they hadn't planned to build the building in which the old ones have to be contained. And the guys from Framatome came along and said, we're not taking these things out. You've got nowhere to keep them safely. So that didn't augur well. And that's why the first time it was shut down for 6 months, it was meant to be to change this. And they aborted that. They aborted that. And then they went on to Unit 2 now. And then they're going back to Unit 1. And basically they're flirting with their license. Their license expires next year. And a lot of us have been saying, well, you're not sure you're going to get that license. And they say, oh, we'll get it. And that sort of implies it's a rubber stamp. But on safety issues, on a nuclear power station, are you comfortable that there's a rubber stamp to carry on with the thing? So, yeah, it's been a mess.
Sure. There's a lot moving in our power supply at the moment since you and I last spoke. We seem to have more generating capacity from solar and from rooftop houses than I think people realize.
Yes.
I've seen different estimates from 2,000 megawatts to 4,000 megawatts. I know in Joburg, the city of Joburg City Power told us just those which have been registered, so rooftop PV for homes is around 90 megawatts. That's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's almost a stage of load shedding in Joburg, for example.
Yes.
When you try and put it all together, I know that's quite a lot to put all together. Are there any grounds to believe that things are likely to get better in the medium term, or do you think things are going to get worse? And I realize perhaps the one variable is Kuberg and the other is what happens to the coal-fired power plants. But there is a lot of generating capacity that is outside the control of governments or Eskom that's coming online.
There's a lot happening, but the thing that worries me is when I say we've left it too late, that we haven't, because that would be desperate. But do you know that it's now coming up for 4 years since our first bout of stage 6 load shedding? December 2019. We're about 3 or 4 months from, maybe 5 months from 4 years away. And do you know that not 1 kilowatt hour of government-procured utility-scale electricity has been commissioned from that 2019 emergency? So the biggest concern I have is that we still seem to be grappling with understanding the level of the crisis and the emergency. And I saw on a WhatsApp group this morning someone saying it's like tap dancing on a razor blade. And, it didn't conjure up particularly interesting thoughts. So they also mentioned that it's become almost like a news cycle. There's a weekly briefing, and the briefing says this one have come back, this one have gone to hospital. And we actually need something a little bit more exciting now. Exciting in the sense of, here's the plan, here's the logistics, here's the ports, here's the orders we've placed for storage, here's the orders we've placed for here's how we're getting some of the grid to be able to take more capacity. We need a real cogent plan, not just, don't worry, the old coal fleet's going to come in and pull us through.
Sure. We've got an election next year, I think you're aware. The ANC has said they understand that load shedding is a big variable in that.
Yes.
Are we likely to have more intense load shedding next year based on what you know at the moment? I realize you're not a forecaster.
Yeah, look, I don't think
maybe not a professional one.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's in the hands of the politicians to decree what happens. It really is in the hands of the system operator. And the system operator can't not protect the integrity of the grid. It's as simple as that. Even if he gets an instruction from, from the president to run, he simply will say, I can't do that. I can't do it. And so I don't foresee any political meddling, but there may be a hell of a lot of diesel spent, money spent on diesel, because that always helps. I've done some work with the Public Affairs Research Institute, and I've shown that each of the metros can go off of load shedding within 3 years and save collectively about 6 billion rand while doing so on their wholesale electricity purchases from Eskom. And we just need to make that happen. These MMFA and MPFA, and there's a whole lot of rules like that. And when you're in a let's call it an emergency situation, if ever there was a time not to break rules, but to say, you know what, you're allowed to sign a 10-year power purchase agreement. If it's going to stop load shedding in your metro, how can we stop you? So I'm hopeful that some sanity will prevail. And yes, the rooftop stuff definitely helps. I've been trying to track it, and from what I can see, there's between 1,000 or 2,000 megawatts. It's basically quite interesting. If you look at the load profile of 2019 at midday, and you look at the load profile now at midday, you can see that there's a sort of a little dip where the load profile has dropped relative to 2019 at midday on average, around about midday, which implies that there's electricity coming from somewhere else that isn't measured in the Eskom sort of data portal.
Clyde Mallinson, thank you very much indeed, the energy expert. As you know, our grid has many moving parts. The problem with moving parts means they require maintenance.